GoForThe2.com in with the Week 9 predictions. Before I give you the selections for this coming Saturday, October 26th, live from the Sports Grid studio inside the FanDuel Sportsbook at the Meadowlands. College football today. You could stream it live 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. Xumo, XUMO, channel 719, Xumo TV, or SportsGrid.com. SportsGrid.com. You could stream it. College football today, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. I'll give you all my selections that are on this video, all the top 25 games, along with some of the under-the-radar picks as the week progresses. So check it out this coming Saturday. Let's jump right into the selections for this weekend. Oklahoma State on the road against Iowa State. Oklahoma State's won 6 of the last 7 in the series, but dropped this game last year in Stillwater by a score of 48-42. The last 4 games in the series have been decided by a total of 22 points or 5.5 points per game. You have a hot Iowa State team that is hitting on all cylinders with a 3-game winning streak. They knocked off Texas Tech on the road in Lubbock as a 6-point favorite, contained Jett Duffy in that offense enough to pick up the road win. Now come back home to face an Oklahoma State team that is reeling after getting blown out in the fourth quarter by Baylor. Oklahoma State was a 4.5-point favorite at home in Stillwater, led that matchup by 3 points, 20-17, heading into the third quarter, and allowed Charlie Brewer and Baylor to make plays. They forced turnovers, forced Spencer Sanders into mistakes, and did roll in the fourth quarter for a dominating road win over the Cowboys. You have an Oklahoma State team that's balanced. They're going to want to run the football, averaging 279 rushing yards on the ground with Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard having a solid season, 1,265 rushing yards, 15 rushing touchdowns. They have a passing attack led by Sanders that is averaging 240 passing yards per game. Sanders has completed just around 62% of his passes, 11 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He's been turnover prone over the last few weeks. Now goes on the road in a very difficult environment to face a blue-collar Iowa State defense that doesn't give up a lot of chunk plays. They force teams to methodically work down the field, but I think the matchup that you have to keep an eye out on is in that win over Texas Tech. They allowed a mobile quarterback in Jett Duffy to rush for 134 yards on their defense. Now, Iowa State statistically has only given up around 114 rushing yards per game, but I think that's where Oklahoma State has an advantage on the road in this ballgame. Look for them to utilize Spencer Sanders on the perimeter. Look for them to utilize Chuba Hubbard in the short to intermediate passing game. Iowa State wins, but this game is a lot closer than people think. Iowa State with only a 4-point win over the Cowboys this coming weekend. Look for Oklahoma State to start fast on the road, jump up early to force Brock Purdy to match them score for score. On the flip side, Brock Purdy playing very well, completing 70% of his passes, 2,018 yards, 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. They're the better team in this matchup, but Oklahoma State pushes the Cyclones to the limit in Ames this coming weekend. Pac-12 battle between Arizona State and UCLA. Arizona State coming off a disappointing road loss to Utah. They got blown out 21-3 as a 14-point underdog. They now face a UCLA team coming off an emotional win in Palo Alto last week. They got a 35-24 win over the Stanford Cardinal. Actually, it was an 18-point win, 35-17 in that battle. Now they go back home to face an Arizona State team that has won 3 of the last 5 in the series by an average margin of victory of 7 points per game. Picked up this victory last year in Tempe by a score of 31-28. But I think it's a tale of two teams. UCLA starting to trend up. Arizona State could be trending down. Couple of factors why I favor UCLA in this ball game. One is the rushing attack 3 straight 200-yard games. 2 weeks ago against Oregon State, UCLA rushed for 256 yards. They followed that up with Joshua Kelly and the crew, 263 against Stanford. They averaged over 5 yards per carry in the last 3 matchups rushing on the ground. That's put them into short third down situations, and that was a concern about 4 or 5 weeks ago. UCLA, when they faced Arizona, was only converting 33% of the time on their third down attempts. Entering this matchup, it's 41% of the time, but when you look at the last 3 games, UCLA has converted 27 of 52 attempts. That's 51%. DTR is playing very well in the system. He's come on in recent weeks, completing 57% of his passes, over 1,500 yards, 13 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And on the flip side, you have a UCLA defense that's only allowing 147 rushing yards per game. They've held 3 opponents this year under 100 rushing yards. When you look at the weakness of Arizona State, it's running the football. They're not a consistent rushing attack. They struggled last week against a very physical defensive front in Utah. And if you need any correlation between this year's offense and last year's offense, with Jaden Daniels at the helm versus Manny Wilkins, last year they rushed for 2,392 yards. This year, entering this matchup against UCLA, Arizona State has only accumulated 917 total rushing yards on opposing defenses. They're only averaging this year 3.6 yards per carry. Now they go on the road to face, I think, an upstart UCLA team. I think UCLA does get the victory. They're starting to buy in to the passing attack and the philosophy of Chip Kelly. Don't think this is a bowl team, but I think they're catching Arizona State at just the right time. Back-to-back road games for the Sun Devils. Upset City, UCLA 35, Arizona State 28 in this ball game. Let's turn our attention to another big battle. It's in the Big Ten. It's Indiana and Nebraska, sort of an off-the-radar game. You have Nebraska that's coming out of a bye week. On the flip side, you have an Indiana team that's coming off a very emotional win over Maryland, 34-28. This is an offense that's starting to run the football more consistently. 2 weeks ago against Rutgers, they pounded the rock for 263 on the ground. They followed that up with an effort last week against Maryland of 186. The matchup to watch is going up against the front seven of Nebraska that's given up 187 rushing yards per game. On the flip side, you have an Indiana defense that's allowing 20 points per game, holding opposing offenses to only 128 yards on the ground, and more importantly, less than 35% in terms of third down conversions. You have an offense for Nebraska that's methodical, rushing for 189 yards on the ground and only 209 through the air. Now, Indiana's quarterback Michael Penix is a questionable for this ballgame, is a game-time decision, but I don't think it matters. You have Peyton Ramsey that did complete 20 of 27 passes last week in the victory over Maryland, 193 passing yards. He has Hale, he has Westbrook, he has Stevie Scott at the running back position, and this is a team that's trending at 5-2, looking to become bowl eligible on the road. I'm going to take my chances. I like Indiana to get the victory, 7 points over Nebraska this coming weekend. Another big battle takes place in the Pac-12. It's Oregon and Washington State. Oregon coming off a very impressive 35-31 victory over Washington. They came from behind by a 10-point margin in the second half. Just remember, when I broke down the video last week, Oregon was just 6-14 overall on the road or on a neutral field site. They stepped up in the second half, made enough plays. Justin Herbert, 280 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. They now face a team in Washington State that's coming off a 41-10 victory over Colorado. It was rainy. It was cold wind. They got a gutty home win over the Buffaloes in that matchup. Washington State has won 4 straight over Oregon by an average margin of victory of 15.5 points per game. Picked up this victory last year on the national stage, 34-20. Justin Herbert and the crew could not step up in this ballgame. You have a Washington State offense that's averaging 440 passing yards per game, rushing for 92 yards on the ground with Max Borghi, and I think that's the matchup going up against Oregon's defense. You saw Washington last week utilize the screen game with Ahmed to neutralize the front seven of Oregon. Look for the same type of offensive philosophy out of Mike Leach on the road against Oregon in Autzen Stadium. Max Borghi can catch the football out of the backfield. He has 36 receptions, 328 yards receiving, and 3 receiving touchdowns. That, to me, is the difference. Oregon wins, but it's a lot closer than people think. Washington State does keep this game within the 13.5-point number. Oregon with a 4-point win over the Cougars this coming weekend. Big battle taking place in the Big House. Michigan and Notre Dame. You have Notre Dame coming off a bye week. On the flip side, you have Michigan coming off a disappointing 28-21 loss at the hands of Penn State. They did cover the number. Shea Patterson stepped up, 276 passing yards, a little too late after the team fell behind by a score of 21-0 at the hands of Sean Clifford and the crew. Sean Clifford stepped up, threw for 182 yards through the air, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Michigan, what do they have to play for at this time? We said it in previous videos that Michigan really struggles since 2016 on the road or on a neutral field site with Jim Harbaugh at the helm. Entering that battle against Penn State just straight up 10-10 overall on the road or on a neutral field site against FBS competition. And more importantly, when you look at against the number statistics, now they're 1-5 on the road or on a neutral field site as a road underdog. Well, they come back home to face an upstart top 10 team in Notre Dame. But guess what? Michigan plays well at home under Jim Harbaugh. Since 2016, this team is 23-2 at home. Last victory came against Iowa, where they got a gutty 10-3 victory. Since 2016, Michigan is 23-2. The last 12 games they've won by an average margin of victory of 24.1 points per game. When you look at this matchup overall, I look for Michigan to start fast, become aggressive on Notre Dame's secondary. Notre Dame is suspect in terms of allowing teams to beat them over the top. They're giving up around 200 passing yards per game, and I think that's the matchup for Michigan. That could open up rushing lanes for the Wolverines in this ballgame. You have to take Michigan at home and bet against them on the road. That's just the way it's been under Jim Harbaugh. When you look at Michigan since 2018, last year, they are 7-0 every time they pound the rock for over 200 yards. The only 2 games that Michigan has won in terms of rushing for over 200 this year, Middle Tennessee State and Illinois. They've won those games, the last 7 games, 7-0 every time they pound the rock for over 200. They've won by an average margin of victory of 28.4 points per game. Look for Notre Dame, who's won the last 2 over the Wolverines. They got this victory last year, 24-17. I look for them to struggle on the road against a Michigan defense that's only given up 163 passing yards per game. I look for them to force pressure off the edge on Ian Book, to force him into short throws underneath coverage. And I look for Gaddis and that offense to open it up at home. Look for them to utilize the same type of game plan that they did against Penn State in the second half. They pass on first and second down. That'll open up the rushing lane. It's not going to be easy, but I do feel that Michigan picks up a 31-24 victory over Notre Dame this coming weekend. Another big battle takes place in the Pac-12. It is Arizona and Stanford. No line as of now. It shows Arizona as a 1-point favorite. Whether Khalil Tate plays or whether Gunnar plays, it doesn't matter. This is a bad matchup for Stanford for a couple of factors. They're only averaging 20 points per game. They're only rushing for 114 yards on the ground, averaging less than 3.7 yards per carry. That puts them in the long third down situations, and more importantly, you have a Stanford defense that's giving up 264 passing yards to opposing quarterbacks. That's the strength of Arizona. They're a speed team. They struggled last week against USC on the road. I look for them to step up. This is just a bad football matchup for Stanford. Traditionally, they struggle with speed teams on the perimeter. Khalil Tate, if he plays, I think they dominate this matchup. If Gunnar plays, to me, it doesn't matter because they will look to utilize J.J. Taylor and Brightwell in the short to intermediate passing game, the screen game, and Arizona does get a convincing double-digit win over the Cardinal this coming Saturday night. And also keep this in mind. Stanford enters this matchup with 4 losses. The last time Stanford did not make a bowl game and was under 500 was 2008. They were 5-7. Jim Harbaugh's second year, keep in mind that their win total for the year was right in the area of about 7.5. Look for Arizona to win this ball game convincingly, 10 points or more on the road in Palo Alto. Last pick is in the Big Ten. It's Penn State coming off another big win against Michigan. They didn't cover the 9.5 opening number and didn't cover the 7.5 closing number Saturday night in Happy Valley, but they go on the road to face a Michigan State team that has won 5 of the last 6 over the Penn State Nittany Lions. They won last year in Happy Valley by a score of 21-17. Now, when I look at Penn State's defense, they are rock solid in run support, only giving up 66 rushing yards per game. They force teams to beat them over the top, and I think that's where Brian Lewerke has an opportunity to make some big plays in the passing game. You look at Penn State overall, Penn State allowed 276 through the air to Shea Patterson. They allowed 286 to Nate Stanley. They allowed over 300 to Kenny Pickett in that battle when they won 17-10. You have a Michigan State defense that is coming off 2 disappointing road games. They gave up 323 rushing yards to Ohio State. They gave up over 200 to Wisconsin and Jonathan Taylor. Now they got a bye to get rested up against an offense led by Sean Clifford. We said it. Sean Clifford is a solid quarterback. He's making the right decisions. This is not, though, a dominant rushing attack out of Penn State. They're averaging around 178 yards on the ground, but only put up 101 last week against a solid front 7 in Michigan. They're going to need a better effort to get this victory over Michigan State, and that's the strength of the Spartans still. They're only allowing statistically 114 rushing yards per game. I look for Lewerke with D'Antonio and the crew coming off a bye week to get the outright win over Penn State. They shocked the Nittany Lions. They've just traditionally struggled against Penn State, and I think this year is no different. 28-24, Michigan State gets the victory over the Nittany Lions this coming Saturday. We're just getting started. If you want all the top 25 battles, tune in this Saturday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. College Football Today, Zumo TV, channel 719, or go to SportsGrid TV, sportsgrid.com. Check us out. I just love talking about college football. Best game in town. See you then.